The Xtreme 2 got another update. Firmware update number 2. That normally signifies something major. You're going from a 1.9 to a new beginning number 2. Something major's happened. So, how do you know there's an update? The first thing you're going to do is you fire up your JBL app. You get to the home screen, it's got a little red dot. It's exciting, something new has come along. So you click options by the red dot, tells you there's a firmware upgrade. What's new, it says. You click the what's new, it says just a few bugs fixed. Of course, it always says that. There's never been a time where JBL say, yeah, we've tweaked the sound, and we've changed the sound, a bit more bass or a bit less bass, and we've gone from 30 watt limit to a 40 watt limit, or 20 watt limit to a 30 watt limit as it was on Xtreme 2. Just says a few bugs fixed. But firmware 2 suggests there's something major come along. So you go for the upgrade. You stick your power lead in the back as it tells you. You click to upgrade. You download the firmware installs. Your speaker restarts. The app says successful. The point is you had no idea what it was doing. So you think it's just a few bugs. It's going to be safe. It's not going to change the sound at all, is it? But of course it always does. So what has changed? So I'm comparing firmware 1.9 with firmware 2. 50% volume on both firmware versions.
Fine, maybe you are the fallen kind. I leave them with violence, the silent side of me. We see where fire starts to breathe. When I would lay in silence, the voice inside of me made me use my mind right. Fine, maybe you are the fallen kind. I leave them with violence, the silent side of me. We see where fire starts to breathe. When I would lay in silence, the voice inside of me made me use my mind right. Stable on a run, stumbling in a dream. You whisper in my ear, lost in your eyes, lost town should stable on a run, stumbling in a dream. You whisper in my ear, lost in your eyes, lost
Battery power, firmware 1.9. Battery power, firmware 2. Can you see the difference? So it's subtle, but it's consistent. You'll see in a minute. Firmware 1.9, firmware 2. So have a look at 20,000 hertz. Can you see that subtle change? They're just pulling it back from almost hitting 20,000 hertz to, I don't know, 18,500 hertz, thereabouts. It's subtle. And then look all along to about 200 hertz. Firmware 1.9, firmware 2. You're losing a little bit all along the frequency spectrum, all the way up to the 20,000 hertz, or what was the 20,000 hertz. And they're adding it back a little bit at the base. 1.9. Have a look at that base. Minus 14. Minus 14. But look at the base peak and then the peak at around 150 hertz. Can you see how it's just subtly being lifted? Maybe half a decibel there. But you can see what's happening. They've nicked a little bit all along from maybe 300 hertz up, including up to the 20,000 hertz mark. And they've added it upper bass, mid bass. 1.9, 2. So maybe, you've made a small error in your recordings, or too small a difference to make a conclusion. Okay, AC power. 1.9. Firmware 2. It's exactly the same. Look at the bass, and then all along the frequency spectrum. 1.9, 2. And at the 20,000 hertz mark, they've nicked a little bit of power all along and stuck it just on the top of the bass. Just a subtle, but enough to make a difference. 1.9, 2. So JBL, being JBL, bugs fixed, and yeah, we've messed with the sound a little bit. You may or may not like that. I can hear that difference. All along, it's losing a little bit of sweetness or flavour, as I would call it, from the mids up to the highs. Yes, you're getting a little bit more bass now, but I can hear that change in the sound. So, looks like we've got a little bit more bass. The Xtreme was always about bass. It was a bit disappointing when the Xtreme 2 came out, because it didn't seem to have as much bass as Xtreme 1. Because there's a difference between bass extension and bass peak. Had a big bass peak on the Xtreme 1 because it was boosted that way. It wasn't particularly natural, but it was boosted to have a bass peak. A lot of people like that. They wanted the same from the Xtreme 2, but even more so. But no, you did get a bit more bass extension, but it wasn't the peak. But it's looking good at the moment. Okay, so they've nicked the power from, it appears they've nicked some of the power from the rest of the frequency response. They stuck a little bit on that bass just to eke out a bit more of an Xtreme 1 type sound. So the question is, woohoo, bit more bass, does it go louder? So maximum loudness tests, both on battery and using the AC plug-in power lead, because it does go louder, as we all know, when you plug in the power lead to the Xtreme 2.
Falling
So now 100% and all the tracks are relative. So you can really see what's happening. Battery power 1.9, battery power firmware 2. It's the same as 50%. Look at the 20,000 hertz and then all along. They're nicking a little bit of power and they're sticking it on the bass. Minus 23 firmware 1.9, minus 22. That's a decibel difference. So it's subtle, but enough to hear the difference if you're listening closely. 1.9, 2. Consistent, 50% or maximum. It's consistent. Stick on AC power. 1.9, 2. Exactly the same. They're nicking the power from the high end and around the 20,000 hertz where apparently nobody can hear it, but yes, you do hear that ambience, and they're sticking it on a little bit on the bass. Firmware 2, 1.9. The upper bass. And then the rest of it. A little bit off the frequency above upper bass, sticking it on the upper bass, mid bass. So you get another decibel. Again, 1.9, firmware 2. On the bass, on the peak, you're getting a little bit more again. So a little bit more bass slam. You've lost a little bit from the rest of the track. I guess they're at the limits now of what they can do with their amp, and they're tweaking it because people keep saying, where's the bass slam compared to the Xtreme 1? We expected more. So they're not quite sure how to keep it balanced, but with that bass peak. So I have seen the comment and I have seen the video about the random guy does firmware up to update, says everything's better. It's got better highs, better in the bass. Well, everyone has their own opinion. My opinion is, looking at my graphs, and to me, as far as I'm concerned, it's clear what's happened. They haven't improved the mids, they haven't improved the highs, but they've improved the bass. They've given you more of a bass slam. It's a bigger bass. And just to prove that, in my opinion, they haven't improved anything other than the bass, if I actually work out the averages, both on battery and on AC power, and when I say, of course, when I talk about the average loudness, every part of the frequency spectrum has its own power. See, bass has more power than the highs. But when you add up every element along that frequency spectrum, you work out, you get the average. It's always weighted towards the bass because there's more power in the bass. But of course, if you didn't have any bass, then it wouldn't be. But the bass always sounds stronger because bass is more powerful. It's that part of the frequency spectrum to do with the wavelength. Now, on battery, firmware 1.9, minus 20.5 decibels average. This is at maximum. Firmware 2, minus 20.5. It's identical. So you can say the overall power is definitely the same. They haven't made it more powerful than the bass because then the average loudness would have gone up. They've tweaked it. On AC power, firmware 1.9, firmware 2, minus 19 decibels 1.9, minus 19 decibels firmware 2. It's exactly the same. So, in my opinion, and I don't like to tell anybody that they're wrong or say I'm right and they're wrong, because it's all about opinions. But I have to say, those who are saying, oh, random guy says they've improved everything, I disagree. If you like the mids and the highs, it's slightly less so now. But you've got more bass. And it's not just you've added a bit to the bass. Of course, everything's relative. So you take a bit off the highs and mids, put a bit on upper bass, mid bass. It's not, you've actually got even more of a difference relative to each other. So the specs say no change in overall loudness, but because they've nicked some from the mids and the highs and stuck it on the bass, and because the bass has more power, when it's where the peak was, the peaks have gone up. So the peak has gone up from 96.2 to 97.5 on battery. That's really significant. That's like 50% more power. It's gone up by 0.4 decibels on the AC power. Of course, there's going to be a margin of error, but I have repeated these tests and it's pretty consistent. So on battery, a bigger difference than on AC power. Most people are going to play it on battery. Overall loudness has not changed, but the peak is significantly louder. And because relatively you're hearing a difference between one going down and the other one going up, it sounds even more of a difference. But the interesting thing to me was, because when the Xtreme 2 hit and people had an Xtreme 1 and they were expecting an Xtreme 1, but even more so, and they were disappointed. I wasn't personally. I like Firmware 1.2 because I don't play it that loud. I liked how great it sounded at low volume. So I kind of miss Firmware 1.2. But for those who wanted another Xtreme 1, and that bass heavy, well boosted, but if you like it, pleasant sound, they found it was a step backwards on Xtreme 2. So how does it now with the Firmware 2, now we've gone that much, 1.2, 1.6, 1.9, 2, with that many stages on, how does it compare now with the old Xtreme 1?
Stormy seas, oh, you meant the world to me. I used to kiss your head when you cried for me. Hold your hand while the pain was over. Keep you warm by the roaring sea. You meant the world to me. Oh, you meant the stormy seas. Oh, you meant the world to me. I used to kiss your head when you cried for me. Hold your hand while the pain was over. Keep you warm by the roaring sea. You meant the world to me. Oh, you meant
So the Xtreme 1, Xtreme 2, and we can finally say the Xtreme 2 goes louder, has better bass than the Xtreme 1. 50%, 77 Hertz is peaking, minus 16.5 decibels. The Xtreme 2, minus 15.1 louder, but at 66 Hertz, so 5 Hertz deeper. And you can see it's a rounder, fuller bass. The difference between the Xtreme 1 and the Xtreme 2, of course, it's that high end on the Xtreme 1. It's still pretty bright. It's still pretty boosted. More than the Xtreme 2 is. While the mids are basically the same. If you look at the peaks around 500, just under 24 decibels. Just under minus 24 on the Xtreme 2. So the mids are about the same. But the difference is the bass is now big on the Xtreme 2. The Xtreme 1 is still brighter. You go to maximum. Xtreme 1 is peaking 95.7. Xtreme 2, 96.5. So the peaks are now bigger. So it's not just louder overall, it's louder on its peaks, whereas when it first came out, even after the first tweak, the peaks on the Xtreme 1 were louder. So the Xtreme 2 now, louder overall, louder in the peaks, even at maximum volume, 67 Hertz, minus 18.4. Don't forget it's minus 18. The nearer zero you go, the louder it is. Xtreme 1, 5 Hertz higher is the peak, and it's still quieter at minus 22.5 decibels. You can see it's quite a sharp peak on the Xtreme 2. I mean, they've really put everything into the bass now, but whereas people weren't happy in the beginning, I think now the Xtreme 2, you can say, does beat the Xtreme 1 if it's all about bass slam and going as loud as possible. So, looking like a win-win, as far as I'm concerned, unless you thought the mids were going to be better and the highs were going to be better. Some people are saying that is the case. I disagree. In my opinion, that's almost 100% certainly wrong. But I think we can put to bed, oh, I'd rather have the Xtreme 1 than the Xtreme 2. Other than you've still got a brighter high and a thinner sound on the Xtreme 1. And if that's more to your taste, makes it sound a little bit faster, then you may still prefer the Xtreme 1. But you can go outdoors now and be pretty happy with the Xtreme 2, that you're not losing out to the Xtreme 1. It's a fuller sound, a thicker sound. I think it's a more balanced sound. It's still bass heavy, unnaturally so, but it's a decent listen. I do like it. I do like the Xtreme 2, and I can't really go back to the Xtreme 1 now. I've got used to the Xtreme 2. Not saying it's my go-to speaker, but go outside and you want a bit of a party going on, the Xtreme 2 does the job. So anyway, that's my Firmware 2 opinion, and I hope you got something out of the video. Thank you for watching.
UK